Hey, good morning again, everybody. I thought I would take a turn at talking about the new Dungeons and Dragons basic rules. Now, I've already been on YouTube, and there's a lot of folks that have been talking about the rules, what they liked, what they didn't like, and I just thought, this would be a great time for me to take a walk down memory lane. I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons in a while. I tried playing Fourth Edition. Um, it was fun. The thing I've learned about games and actually any game, what makes it fun is really kind of who you play it with. There's a lot of folks I've heard. They say they didn't like the fourth edition rules because it felt like a video game or it didn't have the role playing or there's just a lot of things negativity I've read, and I've also read a lot of positive things about it. But then I've heard people say a lot of positive things about other games that I didn't quite enjoy. But I think honestly, what makes that game fun is who you play it with. Like you can go on to YouTube, and if you look up a group, um, they're like Acquisitions Incorporated. There's some guys who they do like a comic strip. They run the PAX conventions. Well, anyway, they do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and they play with Chris Perkins. He's a guy who works for Wizards of the Coast that puts out Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, if you watch their playing of the game, they're joking, they're laughing, and it doesn't matter what rule set they're playing, D&D 4th edition or D&D next, because again, it's the story that's being presented and who you play with if it's going to be a fun rule set. I mean, you might not be happy with the rules, but you can make changes, house rules and stuff. So it really just comes down to, I think, who you're playing with. So there might be things you disagree with in the rules, but you can still have fun with any rule set. And so that's why I said, hey, let's check out this fifth edition because these basic rules here that I have, these are free off of the wizards.com website. You go there to their Dungeons and Dragons section, and it's a free download. It just covers all the basics: combat, a few character classes that they have. Um, let's see, like some races, some class. There's only like four races. There's just a few classes. Basically, this is just enough to kind of give you an idea of what the game is like. The only thing that's missing is like magic items. It has like a lot of normal items that I've seen, but you can make up magic items. Just take a sword, add a +1, bang, you got a magic item. But the creatures, that's the big thing. There's no bestiary, so you can't run a full game from just these rules, but you can make your own characters. I think the intent was you buy the starter box, which has an adventure and a small bestiary with that adventure to cover the creatures in there, plus, maybe make your own adventure with some of the creatures presented. But then the character rules, you could go ahead and toss out the pre-generated characters and use the character creation rules here in this basic rules, and you can make your own characters and run them through the game instead of those pre-generated. And then plus the rules here carry you all the way through 20th level with those basic characters, whereas the box only carries rules to get your character advanced up to level 5. So I think they want you to get the starter box and have these rules to make kind of a robust game until the player's handbook actually comes out in August. So, but instead of really going into those rules, I wanted to go back and just kind of share my experiences with the game and why, if I can find some folks to play with, even just as a character, I don't have to DM. I usually DM a lot, but if I could just be a player, it would be fun just to hop back in because it is memories, good times that you had with friends. And it's so interesting because when I was younger, lots of people played Dungeons and Dragons. Like even folks you wouldn't think who did, and there was a lot of folks who didn't play it. I know a lot of times they associate that with being a nerd and things like that, and I could see that. I know there's been plenty of times where some of the folks I met, I could say, yeah, that's definitely a nerd. But now it just seems more socially acceptable to have a game like this. It's like it's the unplugged version of an MMO. Power goes out, light some candles, boom, you got Dungeons and Dragons. So, and which I've done. I have played that way. But going back, my first experiences I remember with Dungeons and Dragons is probably back in 1984. I was probably about nine, about that time, 9, 10. I just remember having some friends that were like, hey, let's play some Dungeons and Dragons. I had no idea what that was. And I don't even remember the rule set that they had. I don't remember if it was basic D&D or advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But it was just an interesting concept because back then we didn't have a whole lot of video games and things like that, that we do now. We didn't have internet, so a lot of everything we did had to be kind of this unplugged. And it wasn't quite a board game. It wasn't like Monopoly, but yet it let me use the imagination. Like I could see myself either wearing armor or swinging a sword. And I remember my mom saying that I couldn't play it because she had watched on TV. There was a lot of folks saying how Dungeons and Dragons was satanic, a tool of Satan worshiping because it talked about using magic and stuff. And I just remember her saying, no, you can't play it. Years later, she changed her mind, which is great because then I really got into it. And I think the time that I really delved into the game was they don't have any cool artwork, so I can't have like a cool picture up here to look at while we talk. I just remember the second edition had just come out. I remember my stepbrother and we had picked up a few of the first edition books. There was like Unearthed Arcana we got because we liked the Cavalier, I think was in there. There was just some things that we had really started to get into, but the first edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons just had a lot of mechanics that greatly changed depending on what book or supplement you purchased. And there was things that we wanted that it didn't have. There wasn't like a strong skill system at the time that we knew of. Because just as we started to delve into the first edition, second edition came out. And I can definitely think back to looking at first edition. There seemed to be a lot more like demons, pictures, and things like that associated with the game. And so I could see how people might say, yeah, that was a game of evil. But when second edition came out, it had a completely different tone to it. It seemed like a just real nice artwork, real professional looking. The monstrous manual came in a 3-ring binder with great artwork for the creatures. It was great. We loved it, and we just jumped into it. And it seemed to fix a lot of the issues that we thought we had with first edition. Maybe we were just excited to have something new, but we picked up the player's handbooks. I mean, we just all in our little gaming group that we had. We just fell in love with second edition rules. Even though it wasn't a die 20 based game, we still had THAC0 to hit armor class 0, so it took a lot of math to try and figure out, well, if he's got -4 armor class, I need to roll 14. The mechanics are just so different. I remember saving throws. You had specific saving throws. See, like now, like when you hit 4th edition and 5th edition, 4th edition you had like fortitude, will, and reflex. There was like 3 saving throws that you had. Then this 5th edition, now the saving throws are against your stats. So something might be attacking your constitution. But in 2nd edition, they used to have specific, like save versus polymorph and wands. It was based on your character class, based on your level. It was just really different. Every class seemed to have its own experience point advancement chart. See, like now, I think in the intro here, I don't know why when I skip chapters, one of these spots here it talks about your experience. Ooh, come on, right here, beyond first level. See, now, like with, I don't know 3rd edition very well, but like with 4th edition, there pretty much was one advancement chart. Everybody kind of went off this one chart. How do we zoom it? We'll work that. So in like 2nd edition, every character class had its own amount of experience points it took to go up. So like wizards usually took a lot of experience to level up. Fighters not so much, because with fighters really all you had was you swung your sword. Your turn would come up in combat. And I always hated that because the wizard be like, you're flipping through your character sheet, you're looking through your spells, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and cast sleep. I'm going to cast it on these folks and I got to make saving throw. It just always seems so much more involved when you had like a cleric, a thief who has all these different skills, wizard with their different spells and spell effects that they could, attack multiple people at once. Everybody seemed like they had something to do. And then it got to the fighter, and the fighter was like, I'll swing my sword, roll, and I missed. Then you move quickly on to the next person. And so their experience to go up wasn't as much as the other folks. But I've seen in some of the later editions, it looks like they're really trying to balance. And in previous editions, there wasn't really the concept of balance. Wizards took more experience to level up because in the higher levels, they were very powerful. Sleep, hold. They could take on a more powerful person than themselves if they had to, because their magic capabilities were tremendous. Whereas at low levels, they really sucked. But once you started to get them up a little bit, they were powerful, like how you would imagine wizards who could just cause earthquakes and fireballs and chain lightning. Whereas a fighter, from level 1 up to higher levels, it was pretty much just swing your sword once per round. So they were quicker to level up. But now with their balancing, everybody takes the same amount of experience to go from level to level. Now in the 5th edition, I had to admit, I do kind of like that they've given the classes, all the classes so far, some interest as they progress in levels. Not that I want to delve into that, but which is good, because in the earlier editions of D&D, it took fighter book supplements and a lot of extra material to add and some interest to your characters as they progress through the levels. Now they have some things put in there. It's like the fighter has martial arts types that they can purchase, which gives them some different attack abilities. So your low level fighter and high level fighter have some interest to them. So it's good. There's some balance in the character classes so that everybody has something to do, but you still progress off this one experience point chart, which is fine. You go to level 20. Fourth edition, you went up to level 30, but honestly, I really didn't see the need to have 30 levels. It seemed a little much. 20 levels, that's doable. That's workable. You could probably even do the math to go beyond level 20, and they have rules that I don't remember seeing in here, but I do remember, I thought I read somewhere that, it might have been an article I read on the internet, but there's ways that you can go further if you want. Your proficiencies will change and things like that. So having 20 levels, 30 levels, 20 levels seems pretty good. Usually when I play a game, we rarely get anybody past 10th, 11th level, because it just gets to a point where your people are pretty darn capable of handling themselves, and you're already taking on dragons and just, these powerful creatures that it's almost funner to play the low levels. One of the memories I have is you're going through a dungeon, you're coming across skeletons and zombies and stuff. And sure, at level 20 you might have skeletons and zombies, but you have to bulk them up, that they're no longer just a fun zombie or a skeleton. They're all a boss. Everything's a boss, and it's a super tough zombie. But for me, I think a lot of the joy just came from the low level play. You got your weak wizard, everybody's just kind of the basics of their abilities, and you're going into the dungeons and you're fighting these low level creatures. It just seemed more exciting at times. So I'm glad that with 5th edition, they've kind of gone back to a more respectable level 20 as your maximum. 4th edition, level 30, I thought was too much, because the folks I played with, we would never, ever in all the years of gaming come close to hitting level 30, because I'm very stingy with experience. Plus, I like the low level play. But a big thing, though, between 4th and 5th edition is the characters in 5th edition seem a lot weaker than the characters in 4th. 4th, everything seemed real inflated. Characters had lots of hit points. They had refreshes, second winds, a lot of things to keep them healthy and going. And the creatures seemed to have a lot of hit points. They had minions that had like 1 hit point, but everything just seemed grander. more of everything, which isn't necessarily bad, but it really didn't make you feel that nostalgia of rolling a character who's got 4 hit points, because everybody starting out had like 30 hit points, and so I never really felt like characters were in danger of being killed. So as a dungeon master, I kept trying to find ways to throw more creatures at them, and even if it was just minions who had 1 hit point, just overloading them with creatures sometimes, it was hard to strike that balance. Because one thing I found was, even though fourth edition, those first level characters, they had incredible to hit rolls. They had bonuses from everything, it seemed like. So, we might have a dwarf fighter once he plays, his just a normal daily attack, not even like an encounter power, but just a regular at will power. It seemed like he'd have a +8 to hit something. So it really didn't even matter what he rolled, because he was always hitting. Armor class was always like a 22. So because you could start with plate, so everything just seemed to be just outrageous. But now, going back to 5th edition, the reason why I wanted to share this is because it really brought back to me some of that nostalgia of playing the old 1st edition AD&D, and especially the 2nd edition, where things are a lot weaker. When you look at like your characters, like, we'll skip the races here, but if you hop down to the character classes a little bit here, bonk. Let's look at a cleric, for example. Oh, here's some class description. They have hit dice, and a cleric has die 8. I know in the older editions, wizards used to get a die 4, so they've beefed up the wizard a little bit. Trust me, 4 hit points is not much. Rogue used to be the die 6. But you start with a lot fewer hit points. Like here, looking at the cleric, you have a die 8 hit dice, so every time you level up, you can roll a 8-sided die to get some hit points. But at least at first level, they give you 8 hit points plus your Constitution modifier, which is a lot different than 4th edition. It's maybe still a little bit more than what you would get in like the 2nd edition, possibly. It's been a while. But 10 hit points, I'm just picking a number. Let's say your Constitution score gave you 2 hit points. But anyway, 10 hit points isn't really a whole lot. Depending on what you fight, if you get things that are hitting you for like 5 and 6 points of damage, you definitely feel a lot more squishy than you did with 4th edition. Man, 4th edition, we would just, the characters would just roll through a place. They'd have 30 hit points. They could just absorb stuff. But now they've got that fragility back, that, wow, we're first level. Do we really want to fight all these things? So I'm pretty excited about that. The biggest thing that I used to have just from memories was spells. And that was one of the drawbacks to playing that wizard. Even though eventually your wizard would have these cool spells, I remember starting out at level 1, you had one spell, and you had to pick it by name. So you might have known 4 spells, like, well, I know sleep, and I know magic missile, and I know detect magic, but you had to pick one. And I remember, as a wizard, you're like, well, I guess I'll pick magic missile, and then I got my staff as a backup. So you get into combat, you shoot your magic missile, you hit a creature, it's weak, it didn't die, but you participated, you shot it, and then the rest of that combat, you were trying to whack stuff with your staff. And they were terrible at combat because their focus was magic, and so I remember they always had terrible to hit armor class zeros, terrible THAC0 scores. It was tough playing a first level wizard. Plus then they'd have like maybe 4 hit points. So one thing would hit them and they're going to drop down. But what I like how they've done now with magic, with 4th edition, they really went overboard, I think, with the powers. It was fun. I liked the powers, what they did for all the classes. They made everybody feel like they had a lot of options, lots of things they could do. But with like a magic user, it was like they had this infinite reserve of magic. And when we used to do house rules, we used to come up with things like PowerPoints, so that it wasn't like the traditional you memorize one spell. If you had your spell book, you could cast any of your spells from it, but you had a limited reserve of spells you could pull from, because we thought it was silly that a wizard who spent their whole life training for magic could memorize only one spell and cast one spell a day. We thought that was a little limiting. Fourth edition, I think, went too much the other direction, but what they've done in fifth edition, and I think is pretty good. You have spell slots. So, yeah, your wizard might have his spell book and it might have 6 spells in it, but what he's allowed to do is prepare a certain amount of those spells in a day, which, in my mind, preparing, I see it as he's making sure he has the appropriate spell components. He's memorized the words and the gestures. So basically, it's saying at a moment's notice, if he needs to pull a fireball, he's got everything prepared. He can just reach into his, his robes, pull out the whatever, and cast fireball. So he prepares a few spells, and then he has what are called spell slots. So at first level, he's got 2 first level spell slots. So that means of his prepared first level spells, he could cast 2 spells that day. And then they have some rules about arcane recovery and some other things where if he takes a short rest, he can get back like one of those spell slots. And so there's some different rules to keep the wizard in the game, and that's his more powerful spells. What they've done too then is they've given the wizards cantrips, and cantrips are like minor spells that you don't really have to memorize, put in a spell book, prepare. They're just things that he knows. That's just part of him being a wizard. And it's that, I've spent all my years of service studying. I can do the cantrip. It's like what he learned in the wizard preparatory school. Something they taught him day one. Make a fire in the palm of your hand. He can do that at will. And I liked it because it kind of took some of the elements of 4th edition that allowed a magic user to use magic, because that's what they were, but it does put some limits on how much they have. So cantrips they can use whenever they need, but the more powerful spell effects, they still have some limits on how often they can do it. So it kind of takes some of the elements of the at-will powers from 4th edition, encounter powers, daily powers, but puts it in a more traditional presentation. It reminded me a lot of kind of like a hybrid 2nd edition. I really like it. But I can see here I've been rambling on for 22 minutes. So like I said, I didn't want to like go in and really discuss the rules. I just kind of wanted to share some thoughts that I remember as a kid with Dungeons and Dragons, and now here it is many years later. We'll put it that way. Many years later, almost 30 years later, Dungeons and Dragons is still out. They just come out with the 5th edition rules. Doesn't mean I'll ever have a chance to play it with anybody, but it was just a nice, like, wow, this is interesting. And reading it really kind of brought back some memories. I just thought I would share with you. I like what they're doing with the 5th edition. I think a lot of people will like 5th edition more than 4th edition. It does retain some of that old school feeling, but actually brings forward some mechanics from 4th edition that I enjoyed. But it seems to have toned down the scale that I didn't like from 4th edition to a more traditional. I enjoy it. So if you have any, if this is a thing that you do or enjoy, if you play role-playing games like this, tabletop stuff, there's a lot of tabletop role-playing games. Dungeons and Dragons is just one of many. Pathfinder, 13th Age, there's so many. But this is one that speaks to me because was my first introduction, and so to see it evolve over the years, if you average that out over the 30 years that I've been playing, and the game came out well before then, 5th edition rules over 30, that's once every 6 years. That's about how often they bring out a new PlayStation. That's respectable. But it's just been a big part of my life. So, share some thoughts. Do you play? Do you not play? Would you play 5th? Do you play with friends? Do you play over the internet? I remember I used to sit around the table. I had some friends here, like just a few years ago when we played 4th edition. They'd come to my house. We'd sit at the table. I've even tried playing it with like a Google Hangout. Enjoy that too. So what are your experiences with it? Would you play 5th? What do you play? Anyway, leave some comments. But I will talk to everybody later. I gotta find my end recording.